Hello and welcome. How you doing, everybody? Hey, that's good. Yeah, a couple of people excited. I think you're gonna really just have a great day today. You're gonna be glad you came. My name's Andy. I work here at Nebraska Christian. If you haven't met me, I'd love to meet you. Let's connect afterwards. We at Nebraska Christian really believe strongly in training up ministry leaders. Part of that is leadership in the classroom. Part of that is understanding your Bible in the academic world. And a lot of that is getting experience and hearing from and learning from great leaders, which is why we do the Institute for Church Leadership. This year we've got 6 on the calendar. This is our second one, so we're just getting started. And our next one's going to be November 12th with Megan Fate Marshman. Megan is an incredible communicator, so much fun, and really an expert in family systems and all this. So we're really excited to have her coming up here in a month or so. So be sure to come back and look for those emails. If you're not on the email list and you put your name out there, we'll put you on the list. And if you didn't put your name at the sign-up sheet and want to get the emails, please do let me know. Send me an email or catch me afterwards, so that you know when these are coming. And then you can also forward them to a friend, because these are open to anyone, and it includes lunch for free. So, there's really nothing to lose. You got to eat, and you got to take a little time out of the office, so you might as well come to NCC and get a little learning in the process. Today, though, super excited. This is Rich Birch's 3rd appearance here at the Institute for Church Leadership. And I just want to tell you why Rich is a go-to guy for me. I don't know anyone else who does as good a job of combining a great presentation with practical leadership ideas for your church. It is so fun to be with him when he's here, and it's so helpful when he's here. And so I think you're really going to be excited and blessed by being here. I hope you have your notebook or phone or computer out. There's going to be so many notes you're going to want to take. If you miss anything, though, you can get a lot of information from his book, which is of the same title, and we have it in the back today for $10, was it, Coleman? Thank you. $10, along with several other books in the back. Today, we've got some past speakers' books, as well as Rich's. They're out there today, and they're all available. But if you buy them all singly, they'd be $47. But if you buy as a bundle today, just $40 for you. And this is already a discount from Amazon, I'm telling you. You might want to head back there and check that out. But Rich's book is back there, and you can also go to unseminary.com. Because Rich, like us, believes that there's things you didn't learn in school that you needed to learn for ministry. And that's his thing, is developing leaders, so we have a similar heart. I'm very, very excited today. And would you please give an institute welcome to Rich Birch.
Thanks, man. That's nice. Sit down. All right. That doesn't happen at my house. People don't clap when I walk in at my house, so I'll keep coming back here. So we're going to talk today about church growth, and I really appreciate you being here. I said when we were booking this, that this is actually one of my favorite things that I do, and actually it was bugging him. The reason why I'm the 3rd time here is because I'm like, I'd like to come back. When do I get to come back? And a part of the reason why that is because I really do believe in NCC. I don't say this everywhere I go, but I really do think that what they're doing here is unique. It seems unique to me on the kind of stage, and so I think this is a good organization for you to plug in with, whether you're a church leader, obviously, or if you're a student. You believe that at some level, because you're handing a lot of money over to be here. So, but I really do think that this is a great organization for you to spend some time with, get to know. It's a great opportunity. So, what we want to talk about today is church growth, and this is one of these topics that I've been super passionate about and have worried a lot about. In fact, I've thought a lot about this one number. That if you hang around my stuff long enough, you'll hear me say this. And for people who have listened to me, you're already rolling your eyes because you're like, again, he's saying the same thing again. But this number, 94% of all churches in our country are losing ground against the growth of the communities that they're in. So you maybe have heard the more optimistic number, and that's that 80% of all churches in our country are plateaued or in decline. That's actually a very optimistic way to look at what's happening with the church world. It's actually worse than that, because more than half of that, so that means there's only 20% of churches in our country that are growing, but actually more than half of those 20%, 14% of them, so more than half, are growing, but they're not growing as quickly as the communities they serve. So that only leaves 6% of churches in our country that are actually making an influence in their communities. That is a problem for you and for me. If we don't think about that clearly, and if we don't wrestle with that clearly, we're going to have the royal we, the big we, is going to have a problem in the coming years. In fact, we can see that, and you don't have to look very far to see the fact that the message of Jesus is losing its influence in the culture that we are serving. And I don't say that to be like doomsday. I think for whatever reason, God in His providence has decided that you and I get a chance to serve in that community. It's not by mistake that for whatever reason He's called you during this time to reach the community that He's put you in. And so don't shrink away from this 6% number. Lean in and say, well, Lord, we need to do something about that. What can we do about that? And that set me on a journey over these last number of years to try to learn from churches that are making a difference. And a part of what Andy was plugging there, I have this podcast where we interview people, and the dirty secret I'm going to let you in on is what I've tried to do, we're over 300 interviews, is talk to church leaders who are leading churches that are in that 6%, that are growing faster than the communities they're in. And that's influenced my own leadership, the churches I've worked in, the churches I've coached, and then I'm really trying to pass some of those lessons on. And so today what I want to do is help pass on some of those lessons. Now, we can only do so much in the half an hour or so or 40 minutes that we have here, but I want to try to give you both kind of a mindset, a way to think about church growth, that I think church leaders who are in churches that are growing, it captures a bit of the way they think about church growth. And then we're going to jump into some practical stuff. So hopefully by the end of the day, you can walk out with here's some stuff we could actually try. In fact, actually, it's the core of, what, as that book that I would release, you don't have to buy it, although that's the best price. That's cheaper than Amazon. I'm not sure how they're doing that. That's amazing. I think someone's actually paying for the difference between what Amazon and for you, which is really nice. So, but the core of that book, actually, you don't have to buy the book, because today we're going to talk about the core of the book that people keep saying to me, that was the most helpful. So today I want to give you the most helpful thing for free. You've come here, and the rest is just fluff, so you don't have to buy it. But if you want to, you can. That's good too. But anyways, let's first start with the mindset. There's this amazing thing happened in the early 1900s. So it was the time of discovery. It was the time when there were still things that needed to be done in the world. There were still mountains that needed to be climbed. There were still oceans that needed to be sailed, and there were still continents that needed to be discovered. And actually in 1911, there was this amazing thing took place. These two different groups of people set to try to get to the North Pole. And there were two different organizations, the Norwegians and the British, that organized groups of people to go to the South Pole, to go to Antarctica, and ultimately make it to the South Pole. One of these groups made it there actually faster than they were anticipating making it there, and came back with actually very little injury to their team. There was some injury, as you can imagine, traveling across Antarctica and getting to the North Pole does take a certain amount of toll on your body. But then the other group actually, after less than 100 days journey, actually ended up dying less than, I think it was 4 miles from a food drop point. It actually ended in devastation. It was a terrible approach, and they stopped. Both of these groups who went to the North Pole, went to Antarctica, were both led by incredible leaders. In fact, they were both considered among some of the world's best world explorers. They both had well-funded campaigns. They both were backed by governments who said, spare no expense, pull together the team you need to pull together, and tried to conquer the North Pole, tried to get there. Both of these teams had adequate equipment. In fact, they both were literally using what was at the time the absolute highest in technology that they could use. But one succeeded and the other didn't. I want to tell you about the way that these two groups thought about how they would get to the North Pole, and then I want to relate that to church growth. Because because I actually think that there's a significant connection between the way these two groups went to. I'm going to tell you how both of these groups organized their time, and there's going to be a little audience participation. Unless you know the answer, because you've read this story somewhere else, I want to hear from you which of these two groups you think is the group that succeeded and why. So I'll describe the way they got to the North Pole or the way they thought about how they were going to get to the North Pole. And then I want to hear from you. Which group do you think made it there and back safely and which didn't? So the first was the British campaign led by Captain Scott. They called themselves the Terra Nova campaign. And this group, again, really well trained. You can see a picture of them here heading off. This group, really well trained, incredible leaders. They actually had a ton of animals to go with them. They had great supplies. And their kind of operating premise was on really hard days, they were going to travel less miles. And so, because, you look out and it's like, it's really bad out. And so, hey, we're going to conserve our energy. And then on good days, when it's, a clear day, we're going to push as far as we can and as fast as we can on the good days. So when things are good, we're going to move quickly and move far. And then when things are bad, we're going to conserve our energy. What they were, the theory there, the attempt there, was to apply their best energy to the days where it would get the best results. That was really what they were attempting to do. The Norwegian campaign, Amundsen. I can't pronounce that because I'm not Norwegian. Sorry about that. Again, incredible, led by an amazing military leader who had all kinds of experience all over the world, gathered an incredible, actually, international crew, which was interesting. And they pushed to the North Pole, and their frame was this. We're going to march 20 miles a day, regardless of whether it's good weather or bad weather. Now, you can, on a good day, the other crew, they would march 40, 50 miles, which is incredible to think. They would march 40, 50 miles. Some days they would go as few as 5. But Amundsen, they said, we are going to march 20 miles every day, come hell or high water. Does not matter. Whatever it looks like, we're going to pound 20 miles a day, 20 miles a day. Their theory there was, we'll keep pushing through on those hard days. It tells us how far we're going to go. But then on the good days, we'll end up conserving some energy, and we won't go, the whole distance. And we'll kind of be able to conserve energy on those good days. So what do you think? Which of these two frameworks, and this is just interesting. This is not class. Don't think you're going to be. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was it the Scott campaign who kind of traveled far on good days, short on bad days, or the Amundsen expedition from Norway where it went 20 miles regardless? What do you think? Who wants to dare and be, yes, right down front, sir. What is your name? Oh, Randy, yes. Why is that? Oh, proactive instead of reactive. Okay, they just kind of were like, hey, we're going to keep going kind of thing regardless. Okay, good. Anyone else? Would anyone like to counter that? Any reason why they think the other one? Or maybe they agree with that? Yes, ma'am. Work smarter rather than harder. Very good, right? Because it's like kind of respond to your environment. Things, hey, like we're kind of seeing what it's like, judge what's happening around you, and then use that. Yes, sir.
I guess I would ask, how many good days are there?
I'm a Canadian. Every day is a good day. Come on, no. Good question. So which way does that lean you?
It would lean me Amundsen because I would guess it would be less good days, and a lot of days we don't want to get up and do the job again.
Yeah, that's great. Good. That's good. So you just get up and do it, and kind of regardless. Anyone else have any other interesting thoughts? Do I need to be like the evangelist that just says, I'm waiting? No, I'm just kidding. So actually, you're actually very close to what happened at the core of why one group succeeded and what's your name, sir? Peter. So Peter hit on actually one of the reasons why one of the groups survived. So it was the Amundsen group, the group that did the 20-mile march. And actually, historians have debated a lot around this, and there's a bunch of reasons. And if there are people who have studied this, they're going to say you're being too simplistic. So I understand that. Save your cards and letters. But at the core of it, the core theory of these two groups, the main disagreement was this idea of how far we should travel. And so the first group, the Scott group, they actually spent a tremendous amount of time debating, is today a good day or a bad day? Is this a day where we march long, or do we march short? Instead of marching, instead of actually making progress. Where Amundsen's group, they got up in the morning, and there was no debate how far they were going that day. If it was a terrible day, which, to your point, most days in the Antarctic are bad days, they were marching 20 miles. And they were able to make that. And actually, they like I said, they actually ended up being 99 days ahead of schedule. They actually ended up being 100 days ahead of what they thought it would take because of this 20-mile march. Because although Amundsen calculated it out, and he had calculated this 20-mile march thing, he actually fudged his numbers because even himself, he said, I don't think we're going to be able to do 20 miles every day. There's going to be days where we don't do 20 miles. But he had so rallied his team around saying, we are going to do the same 20 miles every day, that they bought into it and actually got there and got back. Where Scott's team spent a tremendous amount of time wrestling through, as I said, well, what is a good day or what is a bad day? This is clearly a 20-mile day. This is a 50-mile day. No, I think this is a 38-mile day. No, this is a 32-mile day. And they diverted their energy. What difference does that have to do with you and with me in church world? Hopefully we're not marching to the North Pole today. But I do think this. When we think about church growth, you and I need to commit to what I think are systems. We need to commit to predictable processes of how we interact with and communicate to people, commit to those processes, and stay plugged in. Keep plugging away at the same 20-mile march, 20-mile march, 20-mile march, week in, week out, month in, month out, quarter in, quarter out. The question becomes, what are those systems that churches that are growing, what are they committed to? And one of the things I've noticed over the hundreds of churches I've talked to is there actually is a fair amount of commonality. When you pull away all what they call them and what they do, you can actually boil down to there are a handful, very actually 5 of them, which end up in this book, 5 systems that I've saw pretty consistently. And a system simply is a repeatable process that saves you stress, time, energy, and money. It's something that you're going to repeat time in and time out. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always going to be the same. You might tweak it after every time. You might say, hey, let's look at the response after every time. But a system is a repeatable process. And what we see in fast-growing churches is behind what's happening there are repeatable systems that they've committed to, that they say, we're going to keep doing these things time and time again. And so today what I want to do is give you an overview of what these 5 systems are that we saw. And I did legitimately try to say, okay, I want to pull back, not just see, because I have led a Liquid Church, one of the churches I was a part of in New Jersey a couple years ago, and actually this last year, or it just came out a week ago, we're flagged again as one of the fastest growing churches in the country. They broke the top 50, 43rd fastest growing church in the country. And so what this isn't is just like what we learned at Liquid, but what I noticed was as I talked with other churches and interacted with other church leaders, is that we had a lot of commonality with other churches that were growing. And we saw a lot of things that were similar. And so what I want to do is give you an overview of what those the 5 systems are. And then we're actually going to deep dive into just one of them and give you kind of some real practical handles that you could take and go. And you're going to say, that's it? Like, that's all it takes? Well, it's not just one of these. It's all 5 of them working together. One other kind of mindset issue before we move on. So the reason why your church grows, and actually, I've had very few people ask me this question, so I just now say it out front. If people read this book, there's literally nothing in it about external marketing. There's nothing in it that's about saying what you need to do is get better Facebook ads or you need to get a billboard on the side of the highway, because that's not actually how your church grows. The way your church grows is people in your church invite their friends to come to church. That is the core reason why your church grows. It's nothing more complex than that. At the end of the day, our job is to motivate our people to invite their friends. Now, the interesting statistic there, 82% of people who don't attend church, remember we've been talking about this, 82% of people who don't attend church would attend church if a friend invited them. Friend is the operative word there, so it can't be like a stranger on the street. But if a true friend invited them to come to church, they would come. Now, the problem with that is in the last year, we know, another stat, only 2% of people who attend church have invited a friend to come to church. So there's a huge disparity there between if we can just simply motivate our people to invite their friends, we'll see their friends come to church. And so these 5 systems, at the end of the day, what they're all about is about getting your people to invite their friends to come to church. That is where your energy needs to be as a church leader when you're thinking about the front door. There's a lot of other things we could talk about today about how we keep people at your church. We could talk about groups. We could talk about assimilation. There's all those other things. That's not what we're talking about today. We're literally just talking about the front door. How do we get your people to invite their friends? So let's talk through what those 5 systems are. The first one is series promotion. Series promotion. So my assumption is that you organize your Sunday mornings in such a way that you kind of have packaged up a series of weeks together with some sort of theme. Now, some churches do this like really robustly, and they might call it, this is a series on relationships for the next 4 weeks. We're doing love, sex, and dating for the next 4 weeks. It could be that kind of thing where it's like really formal. Or you might be from a more liturgical background, and you have a season of the year where you kind of define this is the types of things we're talking about. But the issue for you is as you roll from one series to the next, the question I would ask you is, what are you doing to articulate to people what's coming up next at your church? Not just talking about what's happening right now. I like to call this the Netflix effect. I used to call this the channel changer effect, which is not as cool and hip. But actually, I think it's even worse now with Netflix. Have you ever found yourself, and this could be just theoretical, you might know someone this has happened to, I'm sure this has not happened to you, where you seem to spend an entire evening trying to find something else that's on Netflix? You're just scrolling through Netflix endlessly, and you get to the bottom of Netflix. Have you ever got to the bottom of Netflix, and you're like, that's it? Like, there's nothing else? What that is inside of you is we have this like hardwired thing within us where we want to know not just what's on now, but we want to know what else is on. Now, how does that relate to our churches? The reality of it is there are people that are sitting in your service today, this weekend, yesterday, who they're engaged with what is happening in your church, but they're wondering, what's coming up next? What's happening next month at our church? And if we don't package up in a way if we don't communicate with them in a way that says, hey, this is what's coming up, and this is why you should invite your friends to come to that, then they won't invite their friends. What we need to do is get in front of that and say, hey, this is what's coming up next. And this is actually the one we're going to dive deep into in a minute. We're going to look at actually 6 different things that we did at Liquid every time we rolled over a series that I would encourage you to do. In the book, I think we actually list 10 because we kind of sub some in and out. But we're going to look at 6 today that I think are the highest leverage pieces of that. So the first spoke on the flywheel, I would say, is series promotion. And the goal on this is to commit to what you're going to do every time you launch a new series and do it. Do it every time, in and out. I'll give you 6 things to do in a bit. Now, next one, big days are a big deal. So I used to be the kind of person, I used to say this. I actually used to get on stages and say this, which is bad. I used to say it to my staff. I would say, every Sunday at our church is like a really important day. And there are no days that are more important than other days. And I want every weekend to be the kind of weekend where friends can invite their friends. And I don't think, we're not going to do camels at Christmas time because I don't want to be that church. We're not going to be like the popcorn at, Mother's Day church because that's just terrible. I want every weekend to be great. But then what I did is I started listening to people who invited their friends to come. And what happens? I realized that 2 magical things happen about 4 times a year. One, there are 4 times every year where the people in my church were more likely to invite their friends. And we're going to talk about what those are in a minute. There are 4 times a year where people were more likely to invite their friends. And the other thing is that their friends were more likely to say yes. And so I was ignoring an opportunity to try to encourage people on those 4 times a year to say, hey, you should invite your friends to come to one of these Sundays because it's a really, really big deal. And so churches that are growing, that are making an impact, know that. They understand that there are 3 or 4 Sundays every year that their people are more likely, they're disproportionately likely to invite their friends to come to. And so the question comes, how are you doing 2 things? How are you building that Sunday with friends in mind? How are you doing stuff on that Sunday? This is why people do camels. This is why you do camels. I'm not saying you have to do camels. But this is where that logic comes, because you're like, hey, we want to do something that people will like that don't attend church, and that also our people are likely to tell their friends about on that Sunday. And so big days are a big deal. The 4 days, you probably know a couple of them. The first couple are easy. Christmas and Easter are massive days. Christmas Eve that we're coming up to, I think is probably the greatest day in the calendar to attract people who no longer attend church or who don't attend church. It probably is the largest percentage of unchurched people will attend your church any other day a year than on your Christmas Eve, whatever your Christmas service is. If you're concerned about the people who don't attend church on a regular basis, they're going to show up on those days. That comes from a guy who mostly, I've served in Canada, which people, they do not wake up on Sunday morning and think I should go to church. I know there are parts of the country, and this isn't one of those parts of the country, but when I go down south, I think there are people down there, they feel guilty if they don't go to church. But like, that's not the communities I've served. Like, people don't care. They're like, well, now they're just smoking pot on Sunday mornings. But they're doing something else on Sunday, but they're not thinking about coming to church. I can guarantee you that. But there is something about Christmas Eve that they are strangely attracted to that. They're not even sure why they are. Walmart does play Christmas music still, which is strange. Let's just be honest. That's a little bit strange. And for whatever reason, they're willing to come on Christmas. So Christmas is one of them. Easter continues to be one of them. Again, Christmas is really great for unchurched people. It's probably your highest percentage of unchurched people will ever attend your church will be on Christmas Eve. The second, another big day would be Easter. I typically have seen Easter as really a return to church day. It's probably the day that you get a clearest sense of who are the people that call your church home, because they'll all probably show up on Easter. They're all, and their family will show up. And so Easter tends to be more about how are we kind of reconnecting with our community. But again, it's a big day. We've got to nail that. The question then becomes number 3 and number 4. Which are those? Now, a lot of churches see Mother's Day as the third largest attended day in the year. That day, I think hinges a little bit on if mom asks you to go to church, you say yes because, you love mom because she's amazing, because all moms are amazing and incredible. Or vice versa, if you ask your mom to go, if a kid asks their mom to go to church, like most moms are going to say yes, even if they're not into church, they're going to do that. Father's Day, not the same. You ask dad to go to church, he's definitely not going to church. And he may not, it's just for whatever reason. It just doesn't have the same hook to it. We thought we tried to do this thing at Liquid. That's a whole other story, where we tried to make Father's Day a big deal. It's really not that big of a deal. And I could say that as a dad. So number 3 would typically Mother's Day. A lot of churches see Mother's Day. And then number 4, so what is the fourth one? And this is where I would encourage you to look at your long-term statistics and just actually look at what is your attendance patterns. And a lot of church leaders don't know what their 4th largest attended day of the year on average is. And it can be different things. This one tends to be, number 3 and number 4 can go a little erratic. Usually Christmas and Easter are up there. A lot of churches, when they look at this, which is a little bit humbling, this one, in fact, it's very humbling. A lot of churches, their 4th most attended. Do you know what it is, the 4th most attended? The one that I find super humbling, if you look at your numbers, it might be the Sunday of the time change in the fall when everyone gets an extra hour sleep. A lot of churches, literally, that's their 4th largest attended Sunday of the year, which is super humbling, because basically what that's saying is if we just gave everybody an extra hour sleep every week, they'd come to church, which is, kind of sad, but is true. And so my question for you is on these 4 days, and we can't dive deep into this today, but on those 4 days, those are non-negotiable days for you to be doing something that does 2 things, that will encourage your people to invite their friends, and that their friends are more likely to attend. So those are days where you need to be having, incredible teaching. You need to be ensure that what you're teaching about is targeted at people who don't normally attend church, that you're being clear on what you're teaching about, so the people who go to your church aren't wondering about it, they're not questioning about it. You need to kind of have your A game on, your A team on those days. All right, next one, social media. So you all know this, well, hopefully you know this, that social media has had a profound impact on every industry. It is having a profound impact on the church world that I think for a lot of leaders is still, the fact that I have to try to convince you that Facebook is a big deal is a problem. So in most communities in America, just let this statistic kind of wave into you. Most communities in America, Facebook is being accessed by 61% of your community, of your adults in your community on a weekly basis. 61% of your community on a weekly basis is on Facebook. In most communities, I don't know what it is in your neighborhood. You can find that number out. That's a find-outable number. Now let's put that in context here. So Omaha, there's 420,000 people who we think don't attend church on a regular basis in Omaha. That means that every week in Omaha, there are, whatever 6 times 4 is, 240,000 people who are on Facebook this week in this community. Now, if there were 240,000 people who last week went somewhere in Omaha, like they all showed up somewhere, you'd be like, wow, that's a big deal. Like that's bigger than a Huskers game when they're winning. Like that's amazing. Now, what if they did it the week before that, and the week before that, and the week before that? What if you saw a pattern of 240, 250,000 people every week were doing something in your community? I would hope that as a church leader, you would lean in and say, we should maybe go over there and see what's going on. And maybe there's an opportunity there for us to do something. I don't know what, but maybe we should do something with whatever that thing is that all those 240,000 people keep showing up to. That is what's happening with Facebook today. And that's just one network. We know that the other statistic that I find amazing is that 30% of American women check Facebook before getting out of bed every morning. That's an amazing statistic. 1 in 3, and actually I've had a number of women say, I think it's higher than that. But 1 in 3 women, before we get out of bed in the morning, are checking Facebook. Now, I don't take, that's a non-judgment statement on either of those. This is just what's happening in our culture. The question is, how can we leverage that? So there's a whole conversation. Again, I'm trying not to make this a plug for the book, but in the book we talk about this idea that content is gas and social is fire. That, there is a social media kind of, brewing fire out there in your community. There's something going on there. But in order for your church to make a difference on that fire, you've got to pour some gasoline on it, which is content. And the great thing is churches, we are content factories. Every week we are generating all kinds of factories. All kinds of content. Your pastor is talking about stuff on Sundays. We have all kinds of stuff we want to talk about. How can we package that up to give that to our people, not so that they can enjoy it, but so that they can share it with their friends? Ultimately, how can they make that into some sort of shareable resource? All right, number 4. This one was a surprise for me, a legitimate surprise. The other 3 I could have predicted going into it, but this one just because. So growing churches that are making an impact consistently are getting people out of their seats and into the streets to serve in their community. I just heard of King of Kings. You guys just did a food distribution deal where you got everybody together and said, hey, we're going to make up these kind of food packs that we're going to give to the food bank. Am I making this right? Okay, great. This kind of thing we see consistently, and you look at the fastest growing churches in the country, go on their website and look at what they're doing, and you'll see that 3 or 4 times a year, they're spending a tremendous amount of time, effort, energy, and money to say, hey, people, we need you to not be just here on a Sunday morning. We actually want to motivate 60, 70% of your people to get out of your seats and get out and make a difference in the community. Now, you and I know, as Christ followers, that our job is to care for the poor. You know that. You know that that's what we're called to do. Now, we live in an incredible era where actually the broader community, the broader culture is saying we want to make a difference. So our interest of caring for the poor, caring for people who are disenfranchised, is culturally aligned with people in our community who want to make a difference. And what we're finding is fast-growing churches are saying, hey, we think it's a God thing. Our community thinks it's a good thing. Let's try to meet in the middle and do something together in our communities with people who don't attend church on a regular basis. And this can look like all different kinds of things. We were talking about Tim Tebow Foundation does this amazing event that's just spread across the country called Night to Shine, which is an incredible prom for special needs kids. The great thing about this, or kids with special needs, the great thing about this event is it takes typically 2 or 3 volunteers per guest that comes. And so if you're going to host 100 guests at this thing, you need somewhere between 300 and 400 volunteers to make it work, which is amazing. I know some of you are like, that's a lot of volunteers. But actually, that's the opposite of what we're looking for in this. What we want are things that take a lot of people to get them out. Now, why is this? Why is this important? 2 reasons. 1, a big part of getting back to why does your church grow? Because people tell their friends about it. When you want to give things to the people in your church for them to do that they are going to tell their friends about. And I can tell you, having experienced the Tim Tebow Night to Shine experience, that is the kind of thing that people will tell their friends about. They will say, what did you do on the weekend? You say, you will not believe what I did on the weekend. My church did this amazing thing, and they'll get weepy about it and be like, this is incredible. Now, we obviously think it's important to serve kids with special needs. It's not just a church growth tactic. It's not just like, hey, we want to do this to just so we can reach more people. But when we look at it through the lens of church growth, we need to understand that those types of events are the kinds of things that your people are willing to talk about and that unchurched people are willing to come to. That they're willing to say, I'll come and be a part of that. I'll come and stuff food for the food bank. That would be amazing. I'd be happy to do that. And when you give everybody a T-shirt and it has some fun saying on the front of it, and you encourage them to use social media and use a hashtag, that stuff spreads and it makes a difference. So my encouragement for you is when you're thinking about church growth, and again, there's a lot more we could talk about in this one, but to be thinking through, how are you motivating your people to get out of their seats and into the streets? We can talk more about that in Q&A if you have any questions. Then number 5 is internal communications. So this one probably, originally I was thinking, Again, this really isn't a church growth tactic. This is the one that's probably the least about the front door. It's least about, getting people to invite their friends. But it's important. And in fact, when you talk to church leaders from growing churches, they think about this in the same way as all that other stuff we talked about. They think about it in the same way, which is this is a part of the puzzle of how our church grows. So churches that grow are spending time thinking through how do we get the right message to the right people at the right time? How are we ensuring that our people know what's happening and that we're moving together as a group, that we're stepping through what it means for people to get plugged into our church, that we have clear and obvious next steps when they arrive, that we ensure that people are aware of what's coming up at our church, that people have thought through and we've reduced what we're doing so that we're not competing with their schedule or competing with ourselves. And so this fifth spoke of the flywheel is all about how do we kind of talk internally with ourselves in a way that ultimately encourages our people to talk to their friends. And there's a lot more we can talk about that. I'm going to keep moving because I actually want to dive into one of these spokes of the flywheel specifically, which is series promotion. So this was the very first one I talked about. We're now going to go deep just in that. For 30 series in a row, before our church was flagged as one of the fastest growing churches in the country, it actually kind of took me by surprise when we were named that, because I was like, wow, it doesn't really feel like that. It just feels like we've been doing church, and then yeah, I guess when you step back and you're like, okay, there's been hundreds or thousands of people arrive at our church, it actually made me do a little bit of a double take, and I was like, I need to think about that. What is it that I think that God's used? And there's a lot of things that we could talk about, but there's one in particular that I think for us, we saw as a kind of practical tactic that you could employ in your own church, and it's this whole idea of series promotion. Now, at Liquid Church, we generally did 4-week series, 4 or 5-week series. In our particular church, we did take a slant towards more kind of needs-based series. So we would do like a relational series, and then we might do like a thing of the fall on parenting or that kind of thing. But then we would mix them in with expository series. We'd do maybe like a little bit longer, a 6-8-week expository series. But we were switching from one theme to another throughout the year. Now, we deliberately, stylistically, planned those so that they looked and were as different as possible. So we would literally swing from, an Old Testament, an old, like say a minor prophet series to like a relationship thing. And not that minor prophets don't have anything to do with relationships, but we were trying to change stylistically as much as possible from one to the next. And then even visually, how we designed those series, we would deliberately try to make them look different than each of them. So we would make color changes that were significant. And all of that was trying to hit this change the channel idea that like we want things to be different. But then before every series, there were these 6 things that we did, or I think the 6 I'm going to talk about here are the highest leverage of that. We actually did 10, but these 6 things were the highest leverage that I think every church could do, and it wouldn't be a huge stretch for you. And we did these 30 series in a row, so it was actually over 3 years. We did the exact same thing. And from my point of view, as a systems thinker, I said, listen, I don't want to debate, back to the 20-mile march, I don't want to debate what we're going to do for each series. I want to pre-decide. These are the 6 things we're going to do. The only debate is within each of these categories, figuring out what we're going to do within those. We're not going to debate, is this the series where we're going to do this, or are we going to wait and do this other promotion thing? We know we're doing it. The question just becomes, what does the creative look like? Does that make sense? So let's talk through them. And again, some of this you're going to be like, that's it? But that's okay, because your church can do it. So the first is heads-up announcement. 2 weeks before, every series, we would talk about what was coming up 2 weeks from now. Now, remember I just told you our series were typically 4 weeks long. That was kind of our typical length. Sometimes we go 5 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, but the vast majority of them went 4 weeks, which means in some ways it felt like we were just starting a series. We were like 2 weeks into a series, and we're already talking about what's coming up next. Now, these heads-up announcements, they would typically literally be a part of the Sunday morning, and they would look, something like this. Hey, friends, we've really been enjoying this current series we're in. It's been great. It's helped us grow in our relationship with Jesus, whatever we were talking about this current series. But in 2 weeks, we're starting a brand new series that we're super excited about, and it's called Unfinished. We think that there are things in your life that are unfinished. There may be parts of your life where you think, man, this part of me just doesn't seem done yet. Or there are parts of your family where you're like, I just feel like, that's not done yet. And so the question for you and me is, what do we do with those parts of our lives that are unfinished? And in 2 weeks, we're starting, and we'd have on the screen a graphic that would say unfinished starting in 2 weeks. That's coming up. We want you to know that's coming. We think this would be a great series for you to invite your friends to, for the people in your life who think, hey, maybe their lives are a bit unfinished. The goal of that announcement, of the heads-up announcement, was simply to tweak in people's heads, this thing's coming. It does two things. One, the people who are in the series, the current series we're in, that aren't kind of really liking it, we're flagging to them, don't worry, something else is coming, it's going to be okay. And I know if there's teaching pastors in the room, I apologize for that. Every weekend that you teach is amazing. But there are other people in the room, when they teach, it's not amazing every weekend. And so what we're doing is for helping those people. It doesn't apply to your church, obviously, clearly. But what we want to do is flag for them, hey, this thing is coming up. So 2 weeks out, we would always do that. Next, the next week out, invite cards. So I am a big believer in, which this is, and I've got so much flack for this as I've talked with other church leaders, but invite cards. These are simply printing a small card, maybe a 4x6 card. These are actually showing even smaller ones that are showing in the image here. Those are just even business card size. But a small card that has all the information that's needed on it to give to a friend. Now, what we would do is the Sunday before, we would have these available. Now, it's funny, I was talking to a church who was in the top 10, fastest growing church in the country, and I said to the leader there, I said, give me the one thing that you think God used this year to drive your church to be the fastest growing church in the country. I said, I said, just boil it down. I said, I know you probably have some idea. And he said, I don't know if I really want to talk about it. I said, no, seriously, what is it? And he said, well, this year, and this is why I love this stuff, he goes, because no one would say this in seminary. He goes, this year we switched to, at the end of every series, we would put the invite cards, like we were talking about here, little printed things that have all the information about the series. We would put all the invite cards on people's seats the week before the next series would launch. And we're pretty sure that what that did was that, and he said, that's the only switch we made, 1 year to the next. It's the only switch we made, and we ended up as one of the fastest growing churches in the country. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason why. He said that. I didn't say that. I think there's more going on than just that. But the important piece of that puzzle is this idea of getting something printed in people's hands that says, hey, you should invite your friends. Does a couple things. One, I don't think actually the majority of these cards end up in guests' hands. In fact, I think actually the majority of them end up like on people's, either on their fridge at home or like in their car or like, maybe we have this in the back of our house where we have this place where we drop our keys when we come in, and invite cards usually end up there. But you know what that does for people who attend the church? It's a physical reminder throughout the week, I should invite my next door neighbors. So Larry and Laura are next door neighbors who, I guess they probably won't hear this, who don't attend church. They, I see those cards, and as a person who knows how the psychology of this work, it still works on me. And I'm like, I should just pop over there and see how they're doing. Even if I'm not inviting them, I'm popping over saying, hey, how's it going? What's going on? Laura had gone through some cancer stuff this last year, and like, hey, we'd love to have you guys come. And we've done now enough of the inviting that they're like, yeah, we're coming eventually, not this weekend. So I apologize for her. Lives next door to a church growth guy. But these cards do that. They are physical manifestation in our people's lives, so that they will then know, oh, hey, I should invite my friend to come. But then for the people that they do actually end up in their hand, it does the reverse, or does the same thing. It's a physical manifestation of that invite that has all the information on it, whether they come to this series or a series in the future, for them to arrive at your church. They also should be written so that they're written with words that you want your people to use, because you'll get up and say, hey, we've got a series coming up called Unfinished. Do you have a part of your life that feels unfinished? Have you ever lied awake at night and wondered what's going to happen with my kids? Have you ever lied awake and wondered what's going on with my finances? Well, that's what Unfinished is all about. But then what happens is you give that to their friend, and you're like, I'm not really sure what's going on at your church. They read it, and they're like, oh, yeah, that does sound like something I'd like to come to. What part of what we're playing on there, rather than just a generic invite card, rather than just hey, this is about our church, which actually is what this card is, a specific one that talks about what's happening in this series, what that does is it gauges people's expectation who are coming for the first time about what you're talking about. There was a study done 2 years ago by Gallup that said 2/3 of the reason why people attend church is because of the teaching, what people are talking about on Sunday morning. So we want to give them a resource that says, hey, when you arrive Sunday morning, this is what we're going to be talking about. Invite cards. I can see some people's eyes glazing over, so we're going to move on. I know you're not convinced. Social shareables, 1 week before. So there really is no reason. Most people, so this is the interesting thing, even about Christmas and Easter, those big days we talked about, this weird thing happens where, we spend a lot of time, effort, and energy. Hopefully you're already working on Christmas. If you're not, you need to get on it. this weird thing happens with those big days and all that, where we work on it a long time, but then actually the people who don't attend church on a regular basis, they make a decision within hours of coming to your service or whether they should come. Maybe 48 hours, maybe 72 hours before, somewhere in that week before, they're making the decision to come or not to your church. They don't make a decision 3 weeks ahead of time. They make it in a short few days before. And so what the social shareables do is the week before, on all of your networks, you need to be generating resources that your people, and we can get into more of that, what that looks like we can talk about that in Q&A. You need to be generating things, even if it's just simple graphics or maybe a video. The great thing is, our friend Mark Zuckerberg has given each of you a television production studio in your pocket. You can literally just open up and do a video on Monday morning that says, hey, this literally what you just did. This coming weekend, we've got a series at our church called Unfinished. Have you ever had a part of your life that's felt unfinished? Do you wonder about your kids or your finances? This weekend at whatever your name of your church is, Billy Bob Baptist, come this Sunday. We would love for you to come to that. You can do that today. You don't need any fancy video people. You can make that happen. In fact, there's all kinds of evidence that actually something like that's a little more gritty may actually share better than something highly produced. And those really the goal of those is and you need to instruct your people on this. I was just actually teaching at a church last weekend, and they had rolled out a part of what they asked me to do was they produced this video, and they wanted me to announce it, which was, for whatever reason, I did, which was great. And, I said to the people, listen, we don't produce these things as a church so that you can be entertained. It's not about you. It's about your friends. We post these things on Facebook or on Instagram or wherever we're posting them so that you will share them. That is the point of it. It's not about you. We're not trying to advertise to you. We're trying to give you tools that you can turn around and give to a friend. So there it is, social shareables, 1 week before. All right, next one, the pastoral moment 1 week before. This one is hard to sustain over time. I would say of all these, this was the one that probably stretched us the most. We asked our pastors, campus pastors, or our lead pastor, the week before the series to stop and talk about their experience of inviting someone to come to the next series. So actually get to the heart of it, not be like you should come because this is great, some great marketing pitch. It's like, no, let me tell you about Larry and Laura, my next door neighbors, and I want to say this publicly that I'm going to invite Larry to come to Unfinished, and I plan on doing that on Tuesday, or even better, I talked to Larry, last week about that, and he's thinking about it. I continue to pray for him. What we're trying to do is turn up the volume on the personal connection to move it out of the theoretical and into the pastoral, move it out of the this is great marketing to this is actually about heart change. Because at the end of the day, people being engaged in the mission of inviting is the developmental discipleship issue that we're trying to get at with our people. We know that people engaged in connecting with people who are far from God and asking them to take a step closer is actually a part of their development. And so these moments are about helping them get a sense of what that looks like by actually pastoring from the stage. And so this is a push beyond just advertising. It's not just like, hey, we're advertising this series. It's like we want to use this as a chance to help people grow in their relationship with Jesus. All right, last one, the Saturday email. So the Saturday afternoon, typically we found that was the best time to do that. We would send an email to our people and say, now these we typically underwrote. A lot of times they came from appeared like they came from our lead pastor, and they would just literally say something like this. Hey guys, Tim here. I'm just doing some last minute prep for tomorrow's message, and I'm so excited for what we're talking about. And in fact, I'm so convinced that there are people that have things that are unfinished in their lives that I want to give us one more encouragement to go out and invite someone to come for tomorrow. Whether it's this afternoon at a baseball game, or maybe it's a family member around dinner tonight who normally doesn't attend church. We would love for you to invite them to come. And could you pray for us as we kick off tomorrow? Really looking forward to seeing you. The best is yet to come. Some sort of sign-off thing, and we'll see you tomorrow. And that that email would go out on a Saturday afternoon. We did a study at seminary looking at Saturday afternoon emails. There's a whole other conversation there. Saturday is a great day for us in the church world to connect with people via email. This picture shows exactly what goes on at most of our houses. You can see these people are doing something, and the laptop's open. The email is an accessible, medium on Sundays or on Saturdays for us to be reaching out to people. There's more we could talk about email marketing, but I think there's low-hanging fruit for you at your church in an email like that. In fact, the more underwritten, the better. So not like a highly graphical, like something that looks like, like it was produced by marketing people, but like it was written as if you were writing an email to a friend, asking them to invite a friend. What would you say? Write it like that, send it to them, and you'll be amazed what would happen. Now, the trick on these things is that I've given you those areas. Those are different things to think about that you could do. But the goal on these is to repeat them, is to say, okay, we're going to find, and this could be these things. It could be another 10 things that we're going to do every time we roll over a series. And although I think those are all effective, the goal is to say, we're going to do those every time. We're going to stay committed to those because, we're going to do some invite cards that are terrible, these aren't really well done, and we're going to learn from them. And then we're going to do some that are better, and we're like, ooh, that actually worked better. We heard more positive on that. Let's keep doing that down the road. Or like those Saturday emails, we're going to learn over time what works. But if we only do it once and expect growth to happen, that's just not going to happen. One of the jokes I make in the early part of that book is I say, I was originally going to call the book 1,000 Days to a Bigger Church, but I realized no one would buy a book called that because we all want our church to be bigger tomorrow. But that's not actually how I think church growth works. It's more about an extended process. It's more about saying, what are we doing now that's building the foundation for tomorrow, that's building the foundation for years later? That is more typical of how we see churches grow, that they get committed to one process and they stick to it over time. We're going to take questions because we want to make sure we're as questionable as possible. What time do we have until? 1:30. So we got a few minutes for questions. Just two things. You could go to that website on seminary.com. There's articles there, podcasts, and books and all that. We have a free digital magazine that we just released that it's absolutely free. And if you just text on seminary to that number, we'll actually email it to you. It came out last week, which I'm really excited about. It has a series of articles. This particular one is all about feeding the future. So it's how do we as church leaders really focus on the future. So questions about anything I said or left unsaid. I realize I probably dumped a lot on you. Or Andy's coming for questions.
We're good. Anybody has a question? Great. I'll start with one, as they were unprepared maybe. But I do sense that some people here have questions. A lot of times it's kind of quiet, but I think this crowd in particular is ready. I forgot how fast you talk.
It's the dump. We just call it, just back up the truck.
Wow. Some people talk about like drinking from a fire hose at these things, but like I'm like, my eyes are wide, So good. No. So, one of those big days is coming up, like the fallback day, right? Yep. The time change.
Yep.
If you hadn't thought about this until today, what could you do in 2 weeks to do something on that day? Any practical thing they could just do right now? Yeah,
so if a lot of churches have done actually sleep-in stuff that day for kids, like they've deliberately said like Pajama Sunday, which is kind of fun because already people are sleeping in, and all you're doing is underlining like you're going to get an extra hour of sleep. Why don't you get some sleep and actually come to church? Pajama day for kids might be kind of cool. That's a great day to start a series just because tactically, if you know that that's going to be a big Sunday, like why don't you start something new? Again, you probably can't shift that schedule. Maybe you can. You can still shift it now. With 2 weeks is hard.
Yeah, that's maybe too close.
That may be too close, yeah.
But capitalize. And maybe the only thing you need to do first is go check your attendance records and see if it's true about your church.
Yes.
And then start planning for Christmas.
Yeah, because some for us at Liquid, that wasn't our fourth. Actually, ours was in the new year, so we found the second, a lot of churches have this one as well. The second Sunday in January was a big Sunday, kind of for us. And when we talked with people, it's like a little bit of the, like, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to, eat right, and I'm going to go to church.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of leaned in on that, and we started doing series that were basically just spoke to that, that were like, hey, this is the year for you to get reconnected to God. Why don't you come? We'll help you. We've got this 40-day thing that we're going to do. It's going to make it really easy for you to read your Bible, whatever, to get people plugged back in.
Love it. Questions in the audience? Anybody ready with a question? You're wondering. Rich has some great. Like I said, usually pretty quiet out there. Lot to digest. Okay, Jordan, go ahead. Oh, we got a mic coming over to you. Thank you, Jesse.
I was curious about these Saturday emails.
Yeah.
You said they're written from a personal perspective. If you do that every weekend, won't it lose a personal touch?
Very good. Good question. So we did those Saturday emails just at the launch of a series. So we would be doing 12 of those a year typically. So yeah, they could feel that way. So we mixed it up. They wouldn't all come from Tim, our lead pastor. Sometimes we would have them, we had the advantage, we're a multi-campus church, so sometimes we would send them from the campus pastor in that similar tone. And then even though we knew they were less effective, to fight against that, we would mix them up and do ones that were felt a little more corporate. But yeah, we're only talking, it wouldn't be every Saturday, it would be just at the kickoff of a series, which for us happened basically every month. And so it was, 12 times a year, 10 or 12 times a year. Does that make sense? Yep, no, that's good.
Good. Anybody else? Yeah, Rebecca.
Talking about church growth and being a long-term thing, how do you get people to stay committed if they're not seeing results?
That's a great question. So there's a whole bunch of conversation around how we actually get people plugged in, long-term assimilated into a church. And, really there could be another book on assimilation and kind of getting people connected. Generally what we're seeing though, because that's really also what we're talking about, people in any church, once you get over a couple hundred people, like once you get over 200 people, if folks don't have relationships with people, if they don't actually know people in the church, they're very unlikely to stick and stay. So ultimately, what our goal is to get people to make friends with other people at the church, and that comes through getting people into teams and into groups. And so we have to have a robust system that lays on top of all this, that really, as guests come in, we then are connecting with them and getting them plugged into a group. I'll give you a quick example that's more on the front end of it. A lot of churches do new here gifts where they'll be like, hey, if you're here today, we'd like to give you a mug. Go out in the foyer, we'll give you a mug. That process, so your church should be averaging in an entire year, you should average that number of guests that you have on an average Sunday throughout your year. So if you're a church of 200 people, you should be averaging 4 or 5 people a weekend, new year guests. That's what we would normally see in a church. But what you're doing to ensure that experience is then plugged into a follow-up communication process that ultimately leads to people ending up getting in a team or a group, and you need to monitor that whole process. We don't get into any of that in this book, obviously, or what we're talking about here. But what we see in these churches is a firm commitment to that. You have to do that. It can't just be about the front door. It's ultimately about getting people in groups and teams. The other interesting thing, I know I'm going long on this question, is I think for a long time we've talked a lot about groups, which I think are really important, and getting people into groups is super important. And so this is not a contradictory statement against groups. However, I think a lot of our churches are missing out on a significant connection opportunity by putting too high a gates on the volunteer side of the spectrum. Our assumption has been you have to have a doctorate of ministry and have got everything sorted out. Growing churches have what I like to call, and they don't call them this, I call them the shallow end of the pool service experience, where literally someone could show up this weekend and say, I'm new here, can I volunteer? And we would say, sure, you can do this. And if you don't have something like that, you're missing an opportunity to get people connected. And there are people who that literally happens, where they show up fully baked, they're ready to go, they're looking for friends. And if we say to them, and again, I run into too many churches that are like, well, you need to go through a 12-month process by which you're missing. And so you can do that. I understand that. I understand why they do that. I understand. But one of the principles is you can either have control or you can have growth. You can't have both. And so having more growth means you need to be more open to people and have a more open stance. That doesn't mean, do we let people walk in off the street and let them be small group leaders in the kids ministry? No, we clearly don't do that.
Right.
That's going to create problems. But we do want to have, if you don't have something that you can plug people in right away, you're losing opportunities. Great question.
Totally.
Yes.
Good. Wait for a mic, sir, please, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. There you go. Right there. Thank you, Peter.
Andy.
What a tool.
For the random Sundays, the Memorial Days, Labor Days, how much energy do you interject into those? Or do you keep those in the sermon series or do something special?
That's a good question. So we've handled that differently throughout the years. Generally, we've landed on just keeping them as a part of the series. A lot of churches do one-offs on those weekends. And the difficulty can be is people over time will realize, oh, this is a Sunday I shouldn't come because it's not really connected to anything else. Unless you're doing, I know some churches have found success around like we're doing a July 4th kind of patriotic Sunday and hey, the influence of Jesus in our country or something like that. But I wouldn't stray widely and do, we're just going to kind of slot stuff in. I would keep it as a part of a series, understanding that there are going to be days during the year Like, let's just be honest. Like, that July 4th weekend, none of you would say this because you're all much better Christians. Like, there's a lot of those Sundays where I've been in church and I'm like, if I was not paid to be here right now, I just don't know that I would be here. And again, none of you think that. You're all, I want to be there 52 weeks a year. There are those Sundays that are harder to get people to attend, and that, that's just normal. But we've tried to keep them together because we don't want to give any excuse for why they shouldn't be here. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Good. Let me ask us one last question. We've been talking at a pretty high level, like this is like the whole church could do this,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Is there a way, or should we ask it like this, should a department of a church, youth men, kids men, worship's part of it, but like,
Yep.
there are other things happening, right, on a Sunday morning that you could apply this principle, or is it best done it's probably best done in concert with the bigger church, but if that's not happening, and you want to, what are some things, is there a way to do that in a department?
Oh, totally. Like, I think the same, so kids and youth, take those as an
Right.
example. A lot of this stuff applies to them. Like, I don't, if you were, a lot of churches have used, say, like, well, they're doing series in those experiences, right? We're going to do a month on
Right.
whatever virtue if you're using, say, 252 Basics. That's a great thing for us to let's send something home with parents and say, hey, next month, this is the virtue that we're doing. This is the whatever promotion piece we've got going for that. Absolutely. The same with student ministry.
Yeah.
A lot of student ministries are leading the way on the social media front. They're actually driving that stuff more. I think probably the hesitation has been in those areas would be that my coaching with those leaders would be, you've got to pick what you're going to do and stick with it. Don't, like, it's easy to be like, well, we're doing Instagram for this series, and then like I've seen that in so many youth ministry things, and it's like 6 months later you're looking, there's nothing on Instagram anymore.
Right.
And it's like, okay, that's a problem. Like, unless you've abandoned and go to a totally different platform, but usually we just are kind of waffle back and forth in our commitment. So yeah, you do want to be concerned about how you're interacting with the overall communications plan at the church. You want to compete against that.
Right.
But I do think there's an opportunity for those departments to actually lead the way and say, hey, we're showing some progress here.
Yep.
And then, maybe the adult people, and that's typically, like, there's a lot of this stuff, to be honest, is just repackaged youth ministry stuff that's like, oh, that's working well. Let's fund it well and, and do it with adults. So.
Love it. Hey, we're out of time. For students, after we wrap all this up here in a little bit, we're meeting in 302 to do some more Q&A with Rich. If you'd like to buy a book, there's in the back there with Coleman, credit card, check, cash, and we'll take it all. I was going to say one other thing. Oh, and then you'll just be around here for a few minutes and talk to whoever, follow-up questions, and again, follow him on Seminary or whatever else.
Yep.
Let's give it up for Rich. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, man. Was that all right?